What's going on, y'all? Chuck Dunface here. Gonna take a look at this one right here. This is the Les George Knives Mark III folder. It is in CPM MagnaCut. It is a dagger style blade, as you can see right there. Looks a lot like a Applegate Fairbane, kind of World War I trench knife feel to it and everything else. Kind of got that look to it. Aggressive spear point, and definitely what I would truly call a spear point knife. There's some other, I'll kind of touch on it later, but there's another knife on the table here that calls itself a spear point, but I wouldn't really necessarily call it a spear point. But in any case, we'll get into that in just a few minutes. It is, like I said, MagnaCut blade, black DLC coating, stonewashed titanium scales, obviously a frame lock folder, got a nice lockup at about 50% right there. I don't recall if it kind of settled into 50% or if it came that way originally. It's probably settled in because this has been, I've carried it and used it and everything else, and this is starting to break in very nicely. And as you can see right there, it is running on PB washers. T15 pivot right there, and then your standard T8, and it's T6 on the Emerson style. It's definitely a Les George clip, but I would say it's in the Emerson style. But yeah, it's T6 on that too. A couple things. Overall, I really like this knife. A couple things that when I initially got it, I was disappointed with. But now, after having the knife for a few weeks here, I've definitely my disappointment has been lessened to a great degree than it was originally. Anyway, let's go over a few specs of the knife. We're looking at a 3.375 inch blade. We're looking at about just over a 4-inch handle, and for a total length of about 9 inches overall. I don't have the exact weight specs on me right now, but it is, as you can see right there, it is not milled out. So it's a little bit on the heftier side, but it is not crazy. I mean, if you're used to, if you're carrying this in dress slacks, maybe it would be an issue, but if you've got this in jeans or, khakis, something like that, I don't think you're really going to have a problem. Let's do some size comparisons before we kind of get into the things that I like versus the things I don't like. There is an Ontario actually, you know what? We're going to switch it around. We're going to do it like that because that clip, it does have a pretty aggressive ramp right there to get into the pocket. So we're going to just lay it on this side. I think we'll get better, more accurate size comparisons. In any case, Ontario Rat 1. Go ahead and take a look at the Spyderco Native 5. Let's see what else we got here. There's a ZT 0300. Pretty similar to that one. A Spyderco Endura in K390. Pretty similar to that Spyderco Endura right there. Got a buck 110. Not too far off. I think you're kind of getting the idea, going back to the Endura and the buck 110, I think you kind of get a pretty good idea of the size that this knife is. So it's not small, but it's not gargantuan either. And let's see what else we got here. We'll go ahead and do the Spartan Harsey folder. So it's going to be a little smaller than the Harsey folder. And let's see. We'll do one more. We'll go ahead and do the Microtech, or just the Microtech standard issue. So it's going to be similar size to the standard issue, but a little bit smaller in overall stature right there. So, things I like, things I was initially disappointed with, but don't really care as much about now. Love that blade profile. That blade profile is fantastic. That is what I would call a true dagger, or not dagger, but a true spear point. It looks very much like a dagger, whereas the point of the blade is right along the center ridge of the knife, the center line of the knife rather. But it doesn't have a medial ridge where it would have 4 even grinds on both sides. It does have that nice swooping, almost beak-like grind right there. And it lends to a very nice cutting experience using this knife. I've carried this and used this, I wouldn't say extensively, but a fair amount. And it does cut quite nicely. A couple other spear points that we'll take a look at that this knife kind of reminds me of. There's the Almar Sear 2000. There's a nice spear point style blade right there. Kind of reminds me of that. And let's see, another one I have right here is the Tom Mayo Dr. Death Custom right there. So couple of knives that are definitely spear points. And one knife that calls itself a spear point, but I gotta say, I can't really, John McNeese, I love you, but I can't really call that a spear point. It is a bit of a more aggressive drop point than their standard model, but I wouldn't necessarily call that a spear point. But this knife right here is definitely a spear point blade profile. Very aggressive looking. At first glance, you might say, "Oh, self-defense, definitely. That's its philosophy of use." But I mean, this is definitely an EDC knife as well. I mean, absolutely, you can EDC this knife all day long. Like I said, it's a really nice cutter too. It does operate on a thumb disc a la Emerson. And one thing that I have noticed, and perhaps you'll notice as well, is it is ever so slightly off center, that thumb disc. So the hole was bored not quite in the middle, lest you miss the mark just a hair, but it is favoring the thumb side. So it's still, you get a little bit more purchase on that side. Maybe that was done by design, but somehow I doubt it. I think he kind of missed a little bit on the drill press right there when he was doing that one. But c'est la vie. That's really not that big of a deal. In fact, that's not something I even noticed initially. It was something that, just after having it for a while, I kind of noticed. This thing is running on PB washers, and it is one of the smoothest PB washer experiences out there. And I've had, a lot. I wouldn't call it Sabenza-like or Chris Reeve knives-like, because that's more of a, I don't know. That's a super glassy. It's not that. That's almost like glass on glass feeling. This is more of a, it's really hard to describe. I'm not sure. It almost feels like well-worn Teflon. I mean, it really does. It's different. It's a different PB washer experience, and I think there's a lot to be appreciated, or should be appreciated, about that. So yeah, overall, there's a ton to like about this knife. A couple of things when I first got it that I didn't like that much was the overall feel of the titanium. While that stonewash finish looks fantastic, it is a little bit smooth. I would like to see a little bit more texture. So basically, like if this knife was being built to my specific, if Les George came to me and he says, "Hey, Chuck Nunface, what would you do differently if I was going to make this knife just for you? If this knife is going to be made just for me, I would like a little bit more texture on the scales, maybe a media blast, or just a heavier tumble on the scales. And I would like a little bit of a stiffer detent." Now, the detent, to me, it bothered me more when I initially got it, but I did adjust. I took it apart and I cleaned it, and I adjusted the pivot to where I really liked it, because while I had a really good action, I was getting a little bit of blade play when I would take the tension off the lock bar. And so I took it apart, like I said, and I cleaned it, and I put it back together, and I got it to where I wanted it, and I tightened it down. Now, it was stiffer. I could not get a free drop when I first did that a couple weeks back, 10 days ago, whatever it was. When I took the tension off the lock bar, I could not get a free drop with that. Now I can quite easily, because those washers have just worn in. They're starting to wear off the coating on the blade. Everything is just marrying together so nicely, and it's just really broken in beautifully. You can easily middle finger flick this knife like no problem whatsoever. It flies right out with authority. It drops shut. It's super, super smooth. Just the action on this, both open and close, is super nice, but you can shake the blade open if you give it a good hard shake. So is that ideal? No, it's not ideal, but you kind of got to take the good with the bad sometimes. I don't think it's any sort of deal breaker for me, not one bit. What could you do in order to change that? I don't know. I'm not a knife maker. Maybe take a little bit less out of that cutout, that lock relief right there, to give it a little bit more tension. Because, oh yeah, I didn't mention that too. I did actually, when I took it apart, I did flex the lock bar over just a little bit to give the detent a little bit more pressure, or the lock bar rather, a little bit more pressure against the blade. And so I did that too. So perhaps, if this was being made to my specifications, one of the ways to address the detent issue would be, perhaps a bigger detent ball, detent hole, things like that. But also maybe taking a little bit less out of this lock relief, which would maybe make the detent, or I'm sorry, the lock bar a little stiffer. I don't know. Is that a solution? Like I say, I'm not a knife maker. It does not have an external lanyard hole, but it does have that bar right there. So if you were so inclined, you could definitely put your lanyard around there. Close the knife, you're gonna have plenty of clearance. You're not gonna be cutting your lanyard or anything like that. You got plenty of clearance right there if you wanted to do something like that and put a lanyard on this. So, final thoughts. I wanted one of these for a while. I was glad when I finally got my hands on one. Anytime I really wanted one, it was always be a situation where opportunity and funds were not intersecting. I could never work out a trade on one or anything like that, but then it finally ended up working out where I was able to get my hands on one, so I was very pleased about that. So overall, I really like this knife quite a bit. Oh, one last thing too is I really like how this is flush. This barrel pivot, this pivot right here is flush, and then it's domed right there. I think that's nice. I like how that's flat on that side. Could it be flat on that side as well? I don't know, because it also kind of in that Applegate Fairbairn style, it does kind of give you that indexing point if you're going to get all stabby World War II style with this. You know, USO assassin style. So maybe that's by design. I don't know. But in any case, in conclusion, as they say, this is definitely a knife that I think is worth picking up. I'm really glad I picked one up. I like all of Les George's designs. I've had a V-set before. I don't have it anymore, but I really like that knife. When this knife was released, I really wanted to get one. Like I say, couldn't manage to make it work. Have one now. Really happy that I do. I've had a Talos in the past. I had an older run of the Talos. I know he's doing a new run now. Those will be released soon. I think those are going to go sell really fast because I think those are going to be really desirable. And the blade profile is going to be less polarizing than say, the Mark III's blade profile. So yeah, that's going to do it for me. Stay tuned. I got more things in the pipeline. But yeah, appreciate you checking out this video. Give me a follow if you haven't done so already on Instagram at Chuck_Nunface. Subscribe to the channel. Little button right there to do so. If you haven't subscribed, or if you have subscribed rather, I certainly do appreciate that. If you haven't, please consider doing so. It definitely helps out the channel. And yeah, drop a comment. Let me know what you think. Like the video, drop a comment, share it out there, and stay tuned for the next one. Peace.